They spilled juice on her seat, told her it was an accident, then quietly moved her out of first class, not because of her behavior, not because of any mistake, but because her skin was too dark for their comfort. That's how it started. No yelling, no slurs, just policy, just protocol, just prejudice wrapped in politeness. And no one stopped it, not the flight crew, not the passengers, not the system designed to protect those who could afford a $1,000 seat, but not a second glance. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She didn't even raise her voice. But 3 hours later, the airline lost $4.2 billion. And still, no one knew who she was. This isn't fiction. This is the series they never thought you'd watch. Because what happens when the woman they dismissed as just another passenger turns out to be the one writing the checks that keep their planes in the sky? What happens when the system tries to bury someone without realizing she was the system? And what if she doesn't fight back with rage, but with silence sharp enough to split open a billion-dollar machine? This is the story of Solene Warren, a woman they tried to erase in Aisle 2A. And this time, we're not starting from the beginning. We're dropping you straight into the eye of the storm. The injustice has already happened. The plane has already landed. But trust us, the real turbulence hasn't even started. If this caught you off guard, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started. Comment below. What would you have done in her seat? And tell us, where are you watching this from? We want to know how far this truth will travel. This is more than a story. It's a reveal. Are you ready to see what they tried to hide? The airport shimmered beneath the midday sun, its glass panels refracting golden rays onto the glossy floors below. The concourse bustled with the rhythm of travel, wheeled suitcases clacking over tile, announcements chiming overhead, the distinct murmur of different languages blending into a universal hum. Among the ebb and flow of well-dressed professionals, wandering tourists, and families chasing toddlers, walked a woman whose presence was quieter than most, but no less commanding. Solene Warren moved with unassuming grace, her navy blue coat fitting snugly over a charcoal turtleneck and tailored slacks. Her curly hair, pulled back into a neat bun, gave her face the calm elegance of someone who had seen much and spoken of little. She carried a leather satchel in one hand and a sleek silver carry-on in the other, her ticket tucked neatly into her coat pocket. She paused momentarily near gate A19, eyes scanning the sleek signage before approaching the first-class entrance. As she reached for her boarding pass, a voice stopped her, bright, polished, and clipped the end like a closing door. "Ma'am, this is the priority line," said the uniformed attendant, eyes narrowing slightly. Solene offered a gentle smile, retrieving her boarding pass with practiced ease. "Yes, I'm aware," she said, her voice soft but clear. The attendant glanced down at the pass, then up again, this time her smile more restrained. "I just wanted to make sure," she added quickly. The words didn't sting, not yet. Solene had learned long ago how not to flinch, but they never failed to register. As subtle and sharp as paper cuts. She stepped forward, scanning her pass at the gate, the green light blinking her through. She walked slowly, not to delay, but to take it all in, the silence that followed, the distant glance exchanged between two other attendants, the small whisper too low to catch, but loud enough to be understood. She had walked into first-class cabins before, many times, but there was always this moment, the pause before acceptance, the flicker of doubt before realization, and often, the disbelief that never quite left. Inside the aircraft, the cabin was a portrait of controlled opulence. Cream-colored leather seats, ambient lighting that mimicked sunset hues, and the crisp scent of citrus cleaning oils blended with expensive perfume. She moved toward seat 2A, an aisle seat with extra legroom. As she reached it, she felt the stares, not hostile, just curious, almost confused. A man 2 rows down lowered his newspaper just enough to watch her. Another woman, in her late 50s, nudged her partner with a look that said, "She's not who I expected to see here." Solene ignored them with the precision of a surgeon. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into her seat, adjusting the angle of her reading light. Moments later, a stewardess approached, clipboard in hand. Her smile was firm. "Good afternoon," She began scanning the row. "May I see your ticket again, just to confirm the seating?" The question was routine, but only when asked of certain passengers. Solene met her eyes without flinching and handed over her boarding pass once more. The stewardess glanced down, then back up, then nodded too quickly. "Of course. Thank you." She turned and left, and Solene exhaled silently. She reached into her bag and pulled out a book, a hardcover, no dust jacket, well worn at the edges. She opened to where a silk ribbon marked the page and began to read, though her eyes didn't move. Instead, her mind played back each moment since she stepped into the terminal. 3 separate checks. 1 extra question at baggage drop-off. 2 misdirected comments about group seating. And now, the boarding check, even though her ticket had beeped green at the scanner. It wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. But it never stopped being exhausting. A man passed by her row on the way to his seat, glanced at her, and then at the row number again, as if verifying she was in the right place. She gave a slight nod, pretending not to notice. Soon, boarding neared completion. A different flight attendant, this one younger, more tentative, passed her by, paused, and said politely, "Can I bring you something to drink before we take off?" Solene smiled, genuinely this time. "Just water, please." As the attendant left, Solene looked out the small oval window. The tarmac outside bustled with carts and workers in reflective vests. In the distance, a private jet took off, its engine whining against the wind. She watched it for a long moment, then whispered almost inaudibly to herself, "Not yet." She returned to her book, but her fingers didn't turn the page. Instead, she let her mind wander to a memory, a conversation held in a quiet, glass-walled room just a week prior. A man in a tailored suit had said, "If they ever push you to the edge, you know what to do." And she had answered calmly, "I'll know when it's time." But that moment hadn't come. Not yet. She reached into her bag once more, this time pulling out a small case with a nameplate engraved in gold. She flipped it open briefly. Inside was a badge, not of authority, but of ownership. Her name, her role, her power. Then she closed it and tucked it away again, deep within the bag, beneath the book, beneath the silence. The captain's voice chimed over the speakers, announcing the final stages of boarding. Solene leaned back in her seat, exhaled quietly, and allowed herself to disappear into the sea of comfort and expectations she didn't ask for, but had earned many times over. As the engines whirred to life and the aircraft prepared for takeoff, no one around her knew who she really was. But they would, sooner than they thought. The plane had barely begun taxiing when a voice cut softly through the ambient hum. "Excuse me, ma'am," came the tone, polite, almost apologetic, yet unmistakably calculated. Solene looked up, meeting the eyes of the same stewardess who had checked her ticket earlier. The woman now held a practiced smile and clasped her hands neatly in front of her as if rehearsed. "Would you mind stepping into the galley for a moment? We've had a small situation arise with seating." Solene closed her book, marking the page once more with the ribbon, and stood up without a word. The other passengers barely noticed her movement, too consumed by emails, window views, or pre-flight drinks. As she followed the stewardess toward the galley, she could feel the pressure build in the air, not from turbulence, but from intention. Once behind the curtain, the flight attendant spoke a little faster, her eyes darting between Solene and a small tablet she held. "We've had a request. One of our frequent elite members is traveling with his elderly mother, and unfortunately they've been separated by a glitch in the system. We'd need to reassign a seat to accommodate their proximity." Solene waited, not because she was confused, but because she was tired of this particular dance. "And the seat being reassigned," she asked evenly, "is mine." The stewardess hesitated, caught, then tried to recover. "Well, yes, temporarily. Only for takeoff. We'd be happy to upgrade you again once in the air if space becomes available." Solene raised an eyebrow, her voice still level. "So, I'm being downgraded, temporarily, from a seat I paid for to resolve someone else's problem." The stewardess winced at the word downgraded, as if it was an accusation rather than a description. "We completely understand if it's inconvenient, but this is just a courtesy gesture. We always try to support our loyal members." Soline didn't respond immediately. Her silence stretched long enough to make the attendant shift her stance. Then, with a nod so subtle it could have been a blink, Soline said, "Show me the seat." They returned to the cabin, but not to her former row. Instead, the stewardess led her past row 4, then 5, then 6, all the way to the final row of business class, where a narrow middle seat sat flanked between two broad-shouldered businessmen who were already well into their Bloody Marys. The aisle seat was taken, the window claimed. Soline looked at the tight space with no footrest, no privacy screen, and no overhead bin remaining. She turned to the stewardess. "You're asking me to sit here?" "Just until we reach cruising altitude," the woman insisted. "Then we'll see what we can do." Soline slid into the seat without another word. The two men on either side didn't move to help with her bag, didn't offer space for her arms, and didn't even pause their conversation. The one on her left sighed audibly as she adjusted herself, while the other turned his shoulder toward her in a not-so-subtle angle of dismissal. As the plane rolled forward toward the runway, Soline stared at the tray table in front of her. Scratched, sticky, forgotten. She closed her eyes. 15 minutes later, the plane leveled off. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but no stewardess came. No upgrade followed. The curtain between business and first remained closed. She sat wedged in place, her elbows tucked in unnaturally, and wondered how many more quiet insults it would take before they simply admitted the truth, that her presence in first class had never been welcome. Then came another blow, disguised in civility. A man seated behind her leaned forward and tapped a flight attendant as she passed. "Sorry to be a bother," he began, "but is there any way I can switch seats? I have a sensitivity to strong scents, and the woman in front of me is wearing something quite potent." Soline didn't react, not visibly. She had not worn perfume, only a mild moisturizer, unscented. The flight attendant glanced at her with a familiar half-smile, the kind used when you pretend your hands are tied. "We'll do our best," she said before turning back toward the front of the cabin. Moments later, she returned. "Ms. Warren," she said quietly, "we've found another seat, just for your comfort and his." Soline looked up slowly. "Of course," she said. The new seat was in the very last row before economy, right by the lavatories. She sat, and this time there was no promise of upgrades, no talk of glitches. Only silence. As the flight settled into its mid-cruise rhythm, trays came out, movies played, and whispers resumed. Soline sat upright, hands folded on her lap, gaze fixed ahead, not because she was proud, but because she refused to be reduced. She thought of her father, who used to say, "Some people carry their value on their wrist. Others carry it in their silence." She had never needed a watch to know what time it was. Somewhere up front, a passenger laughed too loud. A toast clinked. A baby cried somewhere in coach. But where Soline sat, there was no sound, only the soft whir of engines and the fading echo of space once promised, but now taken. She didn't call for help, didn't demand to speak to anyone. That wasn't the strategy. That wasn't how you shifted systems. She sat. She listened. She remembered every detail. Because power, real power, did not need to prove itself in the moment. It needed only to observe long enough to decide where the first domino would fall. The hum of the engines grew louder as the flight passed the halfway mark, a faint turbulence rocking the plane as beverage carts began to move down the aisles. Soline remained perfectly still, her posture composed, her hands resting on her lap as if she had been carved into the seat. The flight attendant who had reassigned her earlier now reappeared beside her, her expression rehearsed into concern. "Ms. Warren," she said, placing a napkin on the edge of the tray table without opening it fully. "We're beginning our in-flight meal service. Would you prefer the chicken or the vegetarian pasta?" Soline responded calmly. "I pre-ordered a gluten-free meal when I booked the ticket. It should be listed under my name." The attendant gave a short blink, pretending to consult the device in her hand, then smiled stiffly. "I'm sorry, it looks like we didn't receive any special meal requests on our system. I can offer you a fruit cup and a roll." Soline tilted her head slightly, not in protest, but in consideration. "No problem. she replied, voice level. I'll take the fruit cup. The attendant walked away, and for a few moments, all was quiet again. Then, from her peripheral vision, Solene noticed another passenger, a woman seated a few rows ahead, received the same gluten-free option Solene had requested. The attendant served it with a smile, even added a warm towel and a glass of sparkling water without being asked. Solene said nothing. She simply accepted the cup of pale melon cubes and dry roll placed in front of her 10 minutes later, both covered in condensation. Her tray remained closed for most of the service. No one asked if she needed help. No one returned to check in. She watched as each row ahead received full trays with steaming entrees and folded linens. When the cart passed her row again, the attendant avoided eye contact, moving faster, as if afraid that lingering might provoke something. But Solene had no intention of reacting. Not now. She pressed the call button once, not in desperation, only to request a blanket. A different attendant arrived this time, younger, her uniform slightly looser at the collar. "Hello, ma'am," she said politely. "How can I assist you?" Solene smiled gently. "I'd like a blanket, please." The attendant hesitated, then offered a regretful shrug. "I'm afraid we're currently out. We've only got a few left, and they've been prioritized for seniors and passengers traveling with children." Her tone was respectful, but final. Solene nodded and thanked her anyway. She had brought a shawl, and now folded it over her arms slowly, like wrapping herself in quiet dignity. As the cabin settled into dimmed lights and whispered conversation, a flight supervisor made her rounds, an older woman with a clipboard and a tone of managerial efficiency. She paused by Solene's seat, glanced at her name on a printed manifest, and said, "MS. Warren, just checking that everything's to your satisfaction." The question hovered somewhere between protocol and dismissal. "Everything's fine," Solene replied evenly, though both women knew it wasn't. The supervisor offered a practiced nod and moved on. Behind Solene, someone sneezed. A child laughed in economy. A wine bottle was uncorked 2 rows up with a satisfying pop. The luxury around her carried on without her. It wasn't that she didn't belong in the cabin. It was that the cabin had collectively decided not to acknowledge she did. Then came the moment that truly defined the flight. A man, middle-aged, suntanned, dressed in a navy pullover and khakis, walked from his seat near the front of the business section and paused directly at her row. "Excuse me," he said, addressing a nearby attendant. "Is this the lavatory line?" The attendant nodded, and the man smiled as if amused by his own question. Then he turned to Solene and added, not unkindly but unmistakably, "It's rare to see someone like you this far up front. Travel for work?" She stared at him, not in anger, not even in disbelief, just with the quiet patience of someone who had learned long ago to outlast discomfort. "Yes," she replied after a pause, "but not the kind you're thinking of." The man chuckled, as if she'd made a joke. Then he nodded and moved along. The attendant returned shortly after with a hot towel and a sealed bottle of water. "Thought you might want this," she said. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. Solene took the water, folded the towel carefully, and said thank you. Hours passed. The city lights beneath the clouds came into view. Landing announcements were made, and seats returned to upright position. The cabin stirred with the gentle chaos of descent. But for Solene, everything remained still, her presence invisible, her discomfort accepted, her value unseen. And yet, within that invisibility, she found focus. While others counted air miles or scrolled through photos of their weekend homes, she counted each moment, each word, each gesture. They thought they were teaching her where she belonged. What they didn't know was that she had built the very infrastructure that made their comfort possible. She had financed the runways, brokered the hangars, advised the mergers. She had signed off on the fund that guaranteed half their operating budget through Q3. But she said none of this. She had learned that the most powerful thing you could do wasn't to remind people who you were. It was to let them reveal exactly who they were when they thought you were no one. By the time the aircraft began its final hour of flight, the cabin had settled into the muted hush of mid-air routine. Most passengers either dozed lightly browsed through in-flight entertainment, or stared out into a sky that looked like frozen time. Soline remained upright, her shawl pulled around her shoulders, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the landscape of privilege around her. The soft clinks of glassware, the rustle of newspapers, and the hum of whispered conversations reminded her that she was in the world, but not of it. She was here in body, not in belonging. A tall, uniformed man entered the business cabin from the front and moved with quiet confidence. His badge read Operations Lead Cabin Oversight. His presence was subtle but authoritative, like a conductor entering a silent orchestra pit. He conferred briefly with one of the attendants, whispering behind the curtain. Soline caught his glance as it flicked in her direction. He didn't approach her, but his timing wasn't accidental. Moments later, the attendant returned with a clipboard and paused by her seat. "MS. Warren," she said, voice clipped but not unfriendly. "We're doing a routine post-meal comfort check for select passengers. Would you mind verifying your travel ID again?" Soline didn't hesitate. She reached into her carry-on and retrieved the same boarding pass and identification she had shown at least 3 times already. The attendant glanced over it quickly, then forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "All set. Thank you so much for your cooperation." She turned and walked away, but the shadow of the operations lead lingered in Soline's mind. It wasn't just skepticism anymore, it was surveillance. The curtain to first class swished open, and a pair of attendants emerged, one holding a tray of dessert options and the other pushing a cart with after-dinner drinks. As they reached a row, one attendant smiled brightly at the man seated next to Soline, offering him tiramisu and brandy without waiting for a request. The tray was then pulled back slightly, and the attendant turned to Soline. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, "we're out of the special dietary dessert options. Would you care for a mint?" Soline declined politely, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she refused to accept a consolation disguised as kindness. She had learned over time that when systems deny you, they offer you breadcrumbs dressed as favors. It was easier that way, to appear generous while withholding the full plate. As she leaned back in her seat, pretending to rest, her ears caught a conversation nearby between 2 attendants. The voices were low, but not hushed. "It's just odd, don't you think?" one said. "That she's in this section? She doesn't look like our usual clientele." The other replied with a laugh too soft to echo. "Maybe she booked last minute. Could have been a points glitch." Soline's eyes remained closed, but her mind was sharper than ever. She wasn't angry, not yet, but the pieces were assembling faster than she had expected. This wasn't a handful of bad employees. This was a culture, a coded system of exclusion masked in politeness and policy. Later, when the captain made an announcement about beginning descent procedures, another surprise emerged. A different uniformed staff member, one she hadn't seen before, approached her row and crouched slightly to speak without drawing attention. "MS. Warren," he began, his tone overly courteous. "Our internal logs show a small discrepancy with your seat reservation. Nothing serious, but our protocol requires a brief verification. We'd like to escort you to the front galley for just a moment to clarify." Soline rose wordlessly and followed. Again, this time she was led past first class, into a small administrative alcove beside the cockpit. A third person was already there, a woman with a lanyard, clearly a supervisor. She held the tablet and didn't greet Soline, only looked at the screen and asked mechanically, "Did you personally book this seat, or was it arranged through a travel assistant?" "I booked it myself," Soline replied coolly. 6 weeks ago. Paid in full, confirmation received, and loyalty points applied." The supervisor nodded, still not meeting her gaze. "And the payment method was registered to you directly?" "Yes," Soline answered without pause. "Are you suggesting there's a problem with my account?" The supervisor didn't answer directly. Instead, she typed something quickly, then said, "These checks are standard when we see activity that differs from a passenger's typical profile." Soline tilted her head slightly. "What profile would that be?" The woman hesitated. "Spending pattern, seating preference, route frequency, and skin tone." Soline asked softly, her voice even but slicing through the veneer of professionalism like a scalpel. The supervisor looked up then, but only briefly. "Of course not," she said too quickly. "We don't factor in personal appearance." Solene smiled slightly, a smile that was more statement than expression. "You do," she said. "You just don't call it that." They escorted her back to her seat with polite nods and fake apologies. She sat down again, repositioned her shawl, and resumed reading the same page she hadn't turned in over an hour. All around her, people settled in for landing. Seat backs clicked into place. Tray tables snapped shut. And no one, not a single person, realized what they had revealed. Not about Solene, about themselves. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and the aircraft exhaled a groan of hydraulics as it began its slow taxi toward the terminal. The seatbelt sign blinked to life, and overhead bins clicked with the subtle readiness of passengers eager to disembark. Solene remained seated, her body calm, but her mind tightening like a wire. She knew this part. It was almost over, or so she thought. A final scan. A last insult dressed in uniform. As the cabin stirred, the same attendant who had first relocated her leaned over with a hushed tone. "MS. Warren," she said with an artificial softness, "please remain seated after landing. One of our ground team members will assist you." Solene blinked once, then nodded. She didn't ask why. She already knew. It was never just about protocol. Passengers filed out row by row, with the same rhythm of privilege, soft leather bags, practiced handshakes with the crew, and not a single glance toward the woman still sitting in 28F. The cabin emptied quickly, and soon Solene sat alone, surrounded by silence and discarded newspapers. Her seat neighbor had left without a word. Moments later, a male ground agent boarded. His jacket bore the airline's crest, and his steps carried urgency, but his eyes avoided hers. "MS. Warren?" he asked, as if still unsure. She stood slowly. "Yes." He motioned toward the jet bridge. "If you'll follow me, please." No explanation, no apology. As they walked together, he spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "Passengers secured. Proceeding to Terminal Checkpoint 2. Solene said nothing. The terminal corridor loomed ahead, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above them. They didn't take the standard route through customs. Instead, she was directed down a side hallway, one typically reserved for staff and flagged individuals. They reached a small, glass-walled office just off the main terminal path. Inside were two more staff members, one seated at a desk, the other standing near a computer monitor. "Have a seat, MS. Warren," the woman at the desk said curtly. Solene remained standing. "I'd like to know the reason I'm being detained before I comply." The woman didn't look up. "Your travel data triggered a cross-check. Standard for passengers with inconsistent booking patterns or flag behavior." Solene took a slow breath. "Flag how?" The second officer chimed in, tapping the screen. "Your onboard movement was recorded as irregular. 3 seat changes, 2 interactions with operations, and a notation of possible payment discrepancy from the flight log." "Those interactions," Solene said evenly, "were initiated by your staff. I was reassigned multiple times against my will." The woman behind the desk finally looked up. "Nonetheless, protocol requires verification." They asked for her ID again, then her business card, then her company name, then the last 4 digits of the card she used to book the flight. They asked if she had booked other flights under aliases, if she had ever been denied boarding in the past. Every answer she gave was exact. Every tone remained measured, but something inside her began to crack. They pulled up a list of her past flights. One attendant pointed out that she often booked one-way tickets. "That's unusual," he said, eyes narrowing. Solene smiled faintly. "I own my own time." The woman didn't react. She typed quickly. "We'll need to keep your ID for a moment while we finalize clearance." Solene placed her ID on the desk slowly. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Then I'm calling my legal team." The room went still. For the first time, the woman at the desk hesitated. There's no need for escalation, MS. Warren, we're just following guidelines. Solene leaned forward. Then let me give you one. A person who follows bad policy without question isn't doing their job. They're doing harm. The man at the monitor cleared his throat and whispered something to the woman. She glanced at the screen, then back at Solene. Her face shifted, just barely, but it was enough. Thank you for your patience, she said abruptly. You're cleared. The man handed Solene's ID back with slightly trembling fingers. You're free to go. She took her ID, slipped it into her wallet, and turned without a word. Her heels clicked against the tile in perfect rhythm, controlled, exact, unforgiving. Outside the room, the hallway led back to the main terminal, where the world still spun in glossy advertisements and duty-free perfumes. She walked past it all without pause, through sliding glass doors and into the sunlight. But something had changed. Not in them. In her. For the first time on this flight, her silence was no longer a strategy. It was the calm before the storm. Solene exited the sliding glass doors of the private terminal with the same poise she had carried throughout the flight. Her expression betrayed nothing. No anger, no bitterness, no trace of the emotional erosion she had just endured. Outside, the sun had softened behind a row of pale clouds, the light diffused and gray, mirroring her internal state, measured, deliberate, unflinching. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine purring low like an obedient beast. The driver stepped out as she approached, nodded respectfully, and opened the rear door. She slid inside without a word, settled into the leather seat, and closed the door with the same quiet control she had shown through every indignity. The vehicle merged into traffic, and for a few minutes, Solene said nothing. Then she reached into her bag, retrieved a matte black phone, her secondary line secured, encrypted, and used only for decisions that moved mountains. She unlocked it with a fingerprint and scrolled through no apps, no messages. She simply opened one secure contact labeled with a single letter, A. Her thumb hovered briefly before typing 5 words, execute transfer. Full divest. R41. She hit send. No dramatic punctuation. No confirmation request. No explanation needed. The message disappeared into the ether with surgical precision, and she set the phone back on the seat beside her. Somewhere in a high-rise overlooking a different skyline, the message arrived with a silent vibration on a desk of polished granite. The man who received it was already prepared. Protocol R41 had been written by Solene herself. Years ago, crafted not in anticipation of chaos, but in expectation of power imbalance. It was a clause reserved for breach, not of contract, but of character. He didn't hesitate. He opened his laptop, entered a 6-digit code, and initiated the divestment process of Warren Crown's stake in Silverbird Airlines. No email to the board. No warning. Just movement. Back in the car, Solene stared ahead, her reflection faint in the tinted glass. Her face was calm, but her stillness was loaded. She had endured everything they threw at her: condescension, exclusion, humiliation, and she had responded with discipline. But power doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it simply listens, waits, then strikes. 3 hours later, the news began to break. The ticker on the business channel glitched for half a second, then flashed red. Silverbird Airlines shares plunged 18% following major institutional sell-off. The anchor tried to maintain composure, but the numbers on the screen spoke louder than his voice. By the time the East Coast markets closed, the company had lost $4.2 billion in value. Internal chat rooms buzzed. What the hell just happened? One analyst typed. Warren Crown pulled everything. No notice, another replied. Within Silverbird's boardroom, chaos simmered beneath expensive suits and forced calm. The CFO read aloud from his tablet. All Class A preferred shares previously held under Warren Crown now listed as liquidated. The CEO rubbed his temple, then reached for his phone. It went straight to voicemail. At her penthouse, Solene stood by the window, watching the city pulse beneath her. Her phone remained on silent. She didn't check the stock price. She didn't need to. The numbers were only symptoms. The sickness was deeper. At exactly 7:12 p.m., a personal line rang. She glanced at the screen. The contact name read M. Delacroix Silverbird. She let it ring. Then, on the fourth try, she answered. "Soline," the voice began, low and measured, "I assume you've seen the market today." "I've seen the cause," she replied. "We'd like to talk. Privately." "I already listened," she said. In silence. For 12 hours. "What more is there to hear?" There was a pause. Then, a plea disguised as reason. "Let's not escalate this into a media narrative." Soline's tone didn't rise. "You wrote your narrative when you treated a woman like an anomaly for occupying a seat she paid for. Things got misinterpreted." She cut him off. "No, they got recorded. Not on tape. In my memory. And in yours." There was nothing more to say. She ended the call. Later that evening, an emergency meeting was convened at Silverbird headquarters. Advisors dialed into global calls, PR strategists drafted statements. Legal teams combed through shareholder agreements, trying to find a loophole to undo the damage. But there wasn't one. The clause had been written with intention. If the firm was ever involved in a pattern of discriminatory behavior, substantiated or not, Soline held the right to execute a silent exit, removing all capital, voting rights, and preferred holdings. No negotiation. No arbitration. Just withdrawal. It was her insurance policy against a world that had taught her never to trust assumed decency. Reporters began circling the story, but there was nothing public to hold on to. No quote from Soline. No statement. No social media post. Only silence and market destruction. Across the industry, rival airlines called their diversity officers into meetings. Memos were sent. Training programs were scheduled. Investors whispered, if this could happen to Silverbird, it could happen to anyone. And all of it came from one message. 5 words. Initiate transfer. Full divest. R41. Soline didn't need applause. She didn't need vindication. She only needed results. And that she now had. The morning after the market crash, a series of quiet tremors rippled through Silverbird's internal communications. It started with a flagged email from the investor relations team, requesting urgent update on Warren Crown's exit. Need clarity on nature and timeline. Within minutes, the legal team responded. R41 was executed at 14:02 yesterday. All controlling shares vacated. Clause upheld under silent termination terms. No breach. But that wasn't the issue anymore. The issue was who had triggered it, and why. Midway through a tense boardroom meeting filled with rising voices and falling excuses, someone finally asked a question no one had dared speak aloud the day before. Who exactly authorized R41? Who's the principal on this account? The room fell into brief silence before the head of strategic accounts replied with visible discomfort. Soline Warren. A beat passed. Then another. Warren, the CEO repeated, brows tightening. As in? The head nodded. Warren Crown. The fund. She's not just affiliated. She's the founder. The primary shareholder. The architect. Chairs shifted. Papers stilled. The name meant something. To anyone with industry awareness, it meant infrastructure, capital leverage, global mobility funding, institutional stability. It meant gate access rights and merger green lights, and a seat at the table no one advertised, but everyone obeyed. And they had bumped her from a flight. Not just bumped. Humiliated. Profiled. Marginalized. In front of their own employees. The CEO sank back into his chair, one hand dragging down his face. We didn't just lose an investor, he said quietly. We embarrassed the board's invisible partner. At that exact moment, in another part of the city, a junior journalist named Maya Linton was already chasing the thread. She had followed the market dive overnight and traced it back to the unusual sell-off pattern from a single fund. She dug deeper. When she hit the name Soline Warren, something clicked. She remembered a small headline 2 years ago from a niche finance blog, the silent queen of aviation finance. She remembered the photo, a woman standing in front of a jet hangar, face partially turned, smile barely visible. She compared it to a blurry paparazzi shot from the airport the day before. A woman being led down a private corridor by staff. Head held high despite obvious tension. Same posture. Same build. Maya started writing. Across Silverbird's internal Slack channels, panic was blooming. A customer experience coordinator shared a screenshot of Soline's flight record, time-stamped and annotated with seating changes. Someone asked, who assigned the relocations? Another replied, Ops Lead Whitaker and Cabin Supervisor Lynn. A new message appeared. Legal just confirmed. Those staff are under review. The replies came faster now. Wait, that was her? The Soline Warren. In the staff forum, anonymous posts lit up the board. I served that flight. I didn't realize who she was. She didn't say a word. She looked disappointed, not angry. That's what gets me. I told the gate agent she seemed off, and I feel sick now. HR's about to have a field day. The first crack in the public wall came not from Soline herself, but from a whistleblower. A member of Silverbird's own risk management team leaked an internal memo from 6 months prior. Recommended increased discretion when engaging with passengers of non-standard profiles occupying premium seats. High-value customers have raised concerns over brand dilution. It was signed by a mid-level VP. That memo found its way into Maya's inbox. The article hit at 2:36 p.m. Headline, The Woman They Tried to Move. How Silverbird's culture cost them a billion-dollar ally. The subheading read, She never said her name. She didn't have to. Within hours, the article was picked up by major outlets. Industry leaders weighed in. A former airline CEO tweeted, If you don't know who's sitting in seat 2A, don't assume they don't own the plane. Soline said nothing. She issued no statement, made no appearance. But her silence now echoed louder than any press conference. At Silverbird headquarters, damage control turned into admission. The COO called for a temporary halt on all non-essential flights to stabilize operational transparency. HR initiated a full internal audit. Every employee who had interacted with Soline was interviewed. Some cried, some denied, some simply quit. One particularly shaken attendant, who had offered Soline a mint instead of a meal, gave her deposition. She didn't act like someone important, she said, voice trembling. She just acted. Patient. Too patient. Meanwhile, Maya's article included details few expected. Soline had anonymously funded the educational grants for over a dozen flight academy students in the past 5 years, many of them women of color. She had never taken credit. She had never asked for acknowledgement. She simply gave. And now, by taking away, she had done more to expose systemic rot than any campaign could have. Back at her penthouse, Soline watched the news scroll silently across a muted television screen. Her tea sat untouched beside her. The phone vibrated once. A single text. From shadows we saw. Thank you. No name. Just solidarity. She stared out at the skyline. Her city looked the same. But now it finally saw her back. Soline stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, the morning light tracing clean lines across the polished wood floor. The world outside was still reeling, headlines shifting from shock to speculation. Everyone expected a counterattack, a lawsuit, a press conference, a scorched earth expose. But Soline wasn't interested in blood. She was interested in blueprinting the future. She sipped her coffee slowly as her assistant entered, tablet in hand. The board at Silverbird just sent over a formal letter of apology, she said. 3 signatories. 1 resignation. Soline raised an eyebrow. Only 1. So far, the assistant replied. Also, they're asking if you'd consider meeting to discuss restorative collaboration. Soline chuckled, soft and dry. That's their way of saying, help us fix what we broke without calling it broken. The assistant hesitated, then asked what the rest of the world had been wondering. Will you go? Soline didn't answer right away. She walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a sealed envelope marked Flex Initiative. It was a policy packet she had written nearly 6 years ago, before her name was known, before the fund grew teeth. It had been rejected by 3 airlines at the time, including Silverbird. Inside were guidelines for inclusive operations, diverse hiring, equity-based seating algorithms, and customer protection measures that anticipated the very discrimination she had just endured. She turned the envelope over in her hands, then said simply, "I'll go." But not to negotiate, to offer. The meeting took place in a neutral building, glass-walled, heavily secured, but stripped of pomp. The CEO of Silverbird arrived first, shoulders squared, smile measured. Behind him came the Chief Operating Officer and the new Head of Customer Relations, a woman who looked like she'd barely slept. Solene entered last, dressed in black, hair pulled back, her face unreadable. She didn't shake hands. She sat down, placed a thin folder on the table, and said, "You're not here to win me back. That ship's gone. You're here to prevent this from happening again to someone without my leverage." They listened. For once really listened. She slid the folder forward. "This is the Flex Initiative. Flight Level Equity Execution. It's not PR. It's operational overhaul." They opened the folder. Inside, policy reform models, executive retraining programs, anonymous reporting infrastructure, anti-bias flight routing systems, a complete redesign of employee escalation protocols, and a built-in review board that would sit independently from airline management. "Adopt this," Solene said, "not for me. For the passengers you don't notice. For the names that don't make headlines." The CEO leaned back, visibly shaken. "This is beyond anything we've planned internally." "Exactly," Solene replied. "Because your plans were made to protect perception. Mine were built to protect people." They didn't reject the proposal. They didn't even push back. For the first time in days, no one tried to manage her. Later that afternoon, the airline released a statement, not defensive, not legalistic, but humble. It read in part, "We were wrong, not in one instance, but in systemic practice. And the person we wronged has chosen not to punish, but to partner. That grace is more than we deserve, but we will not waste it." Solene didn't attend the press event. She wasn't the face of the reform. She chose someone else to take that role. A woman named Mariana Reyes, a former flight attendant of indigenous descent, who had been terminated by Silverbird 2 years ago for insubordination after calling out racial bias. Solene brought her back, not as a gesture, but as a decision. Mariana would now serve as Director of Equity Strategy at the newly formed Passenger Trust Division. In an internal memo leaked days later, Mariana wrote, "The woman who changed everything didn't do it with anger. She did it with options, with foresight, with control." That's what power really looks like. Across the industry, other airlines began contacting Warren Crown. Quiet inquiries, drafts of new partnership models, speaking invitations. One executive from a rival carrier wrote, "You didn't just change the game. You rewrote the rules of who gets to play." Back in her office, Solene finally allowed herself a moment to rest. She watched the river move slowly beneath the bridge, her reflection faint in the window. Her phone buzzed, a message from a young pilot she had once mentored. It read, "They're offering me a promotion. They're listening now. Because of you." Solene smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but real. Her assistant entered again. "Press still wants a quote. Any word you want to put out?" Solene thought for a moment. Then she said, "Tell them, I didn't burn the house down. I just turned on the lights." The ripple effect of Solene's proposal settled into the industry like an aftershock, a tremor that didn't destroy buildings, but forced everyone inside to check their foundations. At Silverbird, the implementation of the Flex Initiative began within days, not weeks. But no rollout of reform came without reckoning. The first audit report, completed internally but soon leaked to outside sources, identified over 30 incidents in the past 5 years that mirrored Solene's experience. Passengers of color being reassigned, flagged, delayed, or questioned under vague, standard operating procedures. Names surfaced. So did patterns. The cabin supervisor from Solene's flight, Lynn, was called in for review. What began as a routine performance assessment turned into a formal disciplinary hearing. Footage from the aircraft confirmed she had flagged Solene's seat as potential misplacement within 20 minutes of boarding, despite a verified ticket scan. Her justification in the report, intuition-based guest management, was struck down by compliance as a breach of anti-bias protocols. Lynn was suspended indefinitely, pending termination. Operations lead Whitaker, who had overseen the onboard seating reassignment, resigned before the hearing. His resignation letter included one sentence: "The cost of my silence was greater than I ever imagined." The gate attendant who first questioned Soline's priority access was reassigned to regional routes, not as punishment, but as consequence. HR noted her participation as perpetuation of internal bias culture. But the real fracture occurred at the executive level. During a shareholders' emergency meeting, pressure mounted to hold leadership accountable, not just for the public embarrassment, but for the systemic failures that allowed it. The chief experience officer, who had once proudly dismissed inclusion training as PR fluff, was voted out. His departure package, once worth millions, was reduced to a third after Soline's legal team quietly renegotiated the equity clauses under the moral misconduct provision embedded in Flex. The CEO survived the wave, barely, but only after publicly acknowledging that his previous non-interference leadership had directly contributed to the culture of apathy. In a closed-door session, he said, "I mistook discretion for neutrality. I was wrong." His bonus that quarter was redirected to a new passenger protection fund overseen by Mariana Reyes. Beyond Silverbird, the tremors reached further. A rival airline CEO, known for dismissing bias complaints, stepped down following renewed scrutiny into past complaints. A travel influencer released a documentary tracing the experiences of minority passengers in luxury cabins. It trended not because of outrage, but because it was too familiar. Meanwhile, in quiet corners of the internet, former employees of Silverbird shared their stories. One by one, stories of complaints ignored, of retaliation masked as retraining, of diversity hires used as tokens. None of these outcomes were orchestrated by Soline. She made no calls, filed no lawsuits, posted no statements. She didn't need to. The truth, once exposed, took on a life of its own. At one point, a former flight attendant who had once scoffed at Soline's request for a blanket reached out privately. Her message read, "I didn't see you then. Not really. I thought I was being fair. Now I know I was just following comfort over courage. I'm sorry." Soline didn't reply, but she forwarded the message to Mariana. "Follow up," she wrote. "Maybe she's ready to help fix what she once protected." Meanwhile, Soline received a package delivered to her office by courier. No return address. Inside was a navy blue employee badge, scratched and faded, along with a note. "This used to give me authority. I now see it gave me cover. Thank you for uncovering us." Her assistant asked if she wanted to respond. Soline only shook her head. Let the lesson stay theirs. In boardrooms, executives started referring to internal failures as a Warren moment, the point at which someone realizes that silence is no longer safety. The phrase became industry code, shorthand for overdue accountability. An anonymous source leaked minutes from a closed Silverbird Ethics Committee meeting. One line stood out: "We didn't lose control because someone spoke out. We lost it because too many of us chose not to speak at all." Outside the world of policy and protocol, change began to show in simpler places. A single mother boarding a flight with her son in first class wasn't questioned. A passenger with a Swahili name wasn't asked to re-verify ID. A Sikh man in business attire wasn't randomly selected for additional screening. These weren't headlines, but they were the cracks in a once solid wall. And for those who had built that wall, stone by stone, word by word, assumption by assumption, the reckoning had arrived. Some left quietly, some apologized publicly, some disappeared, but all of them had to face one truth. They were no longer unseen. Weeks passed. Headlines shifted. The world, as it always did, moved on to the next crisis, the next scandal, the next distraction. But not everyone returned to normal. In quiet spaces, where reflection replaced performance, some chose not to forget. One morning, Soline received a letter. Not an email, not a message, but an envelope with deliberate handwriting and no stamp, clearly hand-delivered. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, soft at the edges from having been carried too long. The handwriting was uncertain at first, then steadier by the second paragraph. "Dear M.S. Warren," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect this to be read. But I needed to say something before I leave the industry for good." It was signed by Lynn, the cabin supervisor. She wrote of her 22 years in aviation, her pride in her record, and the discomfort she had always pushed aside when passengers were treated differently under her watch. "I told myself I was following procedure. I see now that I was following fear. Fear of rocking the boat. Fear of asking the questions that would make me see the answers I didn't want. You didn't yell at me. You didn't shame me. You just watched. And it was the first time in my life that someone saw through me so clearly. I had no place left to hide." Solene folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer beside her desk. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That letter wasn't a request. It was a record. Elsewhere, Mariana Reyes launched the first nationwide training tour under the Flex banner. Her team included former critics, once dismissed flight crew, and even a few who had been part of Solene's fateful flight. One of them, a former gate agent, now opened every session with a confession. "I thought I was just doing my job. But my job should have been protecting dignity, not procedure." One of the more surprising applications for Flex training came not from airlines, but from hospitality chains and rideshare companies. Solene received inquiries weekly. Would she consult? Would she speak? Would she write a book? She declined most. She had never sought the spotlight. She had only ever wanted to make the invisible visible. And now that it was, she preferred to let others carry the torch. But she didn't disappear. Once a month, she visited a small training center in a quiet part of the city, a program funded anonymously for aspiring pilots and aviation staff from marginalized backgrounds. She never introduced herself by title. She just listened, sat in the back, asked questions. At the end of each session, she handed out small metal pins shaped like a folded paper airplane, with 3 words engraved on the underside. Eyes open, always. On one visit, she ran into someone unexpected, Whitaker. He wasn't wearing a badge or a uniform. He was holding a broom. The floor sparkled behind him. He didn't flinch when he saw her. In fact, he nodded. "They gave me a second chance. Not as a manager, but as a witness. That's more than I deserve." She nodded once, then walked past him. That was enough. And then came the invitation she never expected. An international forum on ethical leadership, hosted in Geneva. They asked if she would deliver a keynote. She considered declining, until she read the speaker list. Among them, survivors of systemic injustice, leaders who turned failure into reformation, thinkers who believed in mercy over might. She agreed. Her speech was quiet, not written in prose, but in principles. She didn't name names. She named values. She didn't recount the flight. She described the landing. "I've learned," she said, "that justice without grace breeds fear. But grace without truth invites repetition. We must offer both. We must expect both. Because people do not transform when punished. They transform when seen." The room stood in silence after she spoke. Not applause, just stillness. And that was enough. Later, as she walked the corridors of the forum hall, someone fell into step beside her. It was the young flight attendant who had offered her only mint during the flight. She looked different now, older, somehow, softer. "I'm training now," she said. "Not for flights, for people. I tell them about you. Not what you did, what you didn't do. You could have destroyed me, but you didn't. You let me walk away from my own behavior, and then walk back to face it." Solene stopped walking, turned to her. "And are you proud of the person who came back?" The woman nodded. Finally, Solene offered the smallest smile. "Then we both landed safely." If this story stayed with you even after the credits rolled, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We've only just scratched the surface. Tell us in the comments, which moment hit you hardest? Did Solene's silence say more than words ever could? And where in the world are you watching this from? We're listening. Always.